Welcome to the Guthrie Family Podcast. I'm Danny and this is Haley, and this podcast is about parenting and relationships. Today we're going to be talking about consistency in parenting. How you doing, Haley?
I'm good.
It's been a week.
Yeah.
So we're back, getting close to Christmas, and everything been going good?
Yep. Very good.
Yeah. You're very verbal on that.
Yep.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about consistency in parenting and kind of how we've used that and how we've come to understand and learn how why that's so important.
Okay, so consistency, just starting out with what it is, but being consistent is one of the primary ways of being successful. So in order to be successful, you have to be consistent at something. So we talked about, we looked up some things just to research this, and we looked at individual success, success at work, financial success, success as a parent. So being consistent as a parent creates successful children.
Right.
So,
and we've talked about this before. We've talked to parents that's asked questions in the past about, and a lot of times it's around discipline. Like, why my kid always does this, and I'm sick and tired of getting home to him for the same thing. And they're like, how do you do that? What's your view on that? And one of the things that we've told them in the past is that we just try really, really hard to be consistent. The Bible says in, I don't have the scripture, but it says, make your no mean no and your yes mean yes. And what that means is when you say something, you mean it. You don't tell your kid, hey, go sit down. And as they continue to nag you, you say, okay, well, you can go play. If you tell your child, go sit down, they need to go sit down. You need to make them mind every single time you do that.
So let me just say that we are not perfect parents. We don't parent perfectly, and our kids are definitely not perfect.
Right, and we're just trying to share with you guys things that we've used that sometimes works for us, and sometimes it doesn't. But consistency is probably one of the most important things to giving your kids stability in their life, and actually being consistent helps them to feel in control of things. They're in control of themselves because they know the outcome. If you're consistent with discipline or consistent with supper time every night, they know the outcome before they get there, so that they can plan and understand what's coming because you're so consistent.
Well, we started this when Zoe was younger, so I wish we'd started when she was born.
Right.
And this is kind of where this is stemmed from. When you're first-time parents, it's really hard to come up with that routine, and you really just don't realize that you're in charge. I think that was the biggest thing as a parent when I had this baby. Of course, I loved her so much, but I just didn't realize that I was in control of the situation. Even though it sounds very silly, it's kind of, I see it true in a lot of parents' lives when they're pleading and struggling with their children and struggling with routines and trying to get their children to bed and to eat and things like that. So I finally started reading some books, and I really think that that's probably the best way to learn how to do something if you really don't feel like you understand how to do something. Anyway, so I started reading books, and I came across a really great book by Gary Ezos, and it was called Baby Wise, and it really taught me how routine and how important it was for your child and for their development and for you as a parent, and giving you time to yourself as well, so that you can recharge, that you can be a better parent.
Right.
And so moving on, he made several books. And so while a lot of what I referenced today will actually be from his Child Wise book, that has some really great, good and biblical principles in it.
Right.
So consistency in parenting is setting up a moral base and establishing authority to teach and guide our children to learn basic right and wrong and develop the ability to make good choices as they mature. So that's a lot of information, but that's basically what I came up with as the topic of how to say what is consistency,
right,
and how can you be consistent as a parent. Consistency in routines makes happy children, although it is very difficult. So consistency is not something that is easy, or I think we all would be more consistent.
Right, because you feel like you're continuously getting onto your child for the same thing, or continuously guiding them with the same thing, and you're like, oh my gosh, are you ever going to get this? And the truth is, they just need that consistency. And one of the things, they actually get it, but children always push boundaries just to see if they can, to figure out what their boundaries are and to see if they can move a little bit further father in those boundaries. So even though that they know that bedtime is 8:00, they're going to, like our oldest boy, bedtime's 8:00. It's always 8:00. Nothing ever changes. He knows bedtime's 8:00, but almost every night he says, well, can I stay up with y'all for a few more minutes? So he's always, even though we're consistent in that, he knows the boundaries, he knows the rules, he always pushes against that sometimes. And there's special occasions that we allow him to do that, but we're even consistent in these special occasions because he knows when those are. But like 5 days a week, school days, he's always in bed at 8:00, and he knows that. But he'll still ask sometimes, can I stay up a little later?
Well, almost every night.
Right. So just because you're being consistent, the struggle with consistency is that your children are going to push those boundaries. Even though that they know that this is the rule, they're still going to push those boundaries to see if they will change.
They're like little sharks. They sense your weakness.
Right. Yes. And that's the hard part about being consistent, is because it's continuously sticking with something and not giving in. And it's, sometimes it feels like you're hurting your child, you're being too cruel to your child, but actually the more you give in and the less consistent you are, the more you hurt them.
Right. It creates unhappiness and insecurity in children. So we have to be consistent as parents in order for our kid to ask our kids to be consistent. So we as parents really need to work on personally being consistent in our own lives. Now, this is something that we all struggle with. I know Danny and I do as well.
Right.
But being on a consistent routine, actually, they've shown for adults is really good for us as well. And so if we have in our mind consistently, we're going to do things, we're going to get up in the morning and read our Bible. We are going to pray with our children. We are going to, do Bible study with them at night. If we implement this every day and we are consistent with our routines and our children see this, it does produce security because our children know what to expect from us.
Right.
So,
and Hal Elrod wrote a great book. It's called Miracle Morning, and what it's talking about in that book, you need to get it and read it. It's a really great book about your morning, but it's talking about routines. It's talking about the powerful things that you can do in the morning, like planning your day and spending some quiet time with God. That's what we would say. I think in the book he talks a little bit about meditation, but meditating on God, meditating on your day, and planning your day out and creating those routines in the morning. If it be get up and go run or exercise and then do this and then do this and then do this, or if you get up, you plan your day and then go run and exercise, maybe take a shower after that. But routines, one of the points in there is how important routines are, because as you create a routine and as you do it, then it becomes routine. So you really don't have to think about it, and it's not as difficult on the 30th day as it was on the first. And it's the same with your children. If you create routines for them, they know what to expect, and it becomes just natural to do it. It's not something that they really have to put a lot of thought into, and it just becomes natural for them to do it.
One of the other things that causes problems with, or that interferes with being consistent, is parents not being on the same page.
Right.
So this is something really important, and we continue to talk about marriage relationships hopefully throughout our podcast. We're going to continue to talk about the importance of marriage and our relationships, but one of the things that we have to do is we have to be on the same page. Right. So as a mother, if you are constantly questioning your husband, you're saying, you were too hard on them or whatever, your children see that. They see those inconsistencies. And even though it's hard, because sometimes I think, gosh, I would have handled that differently. And I think Danny has told me before he would handle it differently, but we don't ever question each other
in front of the children.
We have a united front. And so as parents, you really need to talk about how you're going to discipline your children, the way that you're going to handle problems, and being consistent. And sometimes it is one parent or another that's the problem with the consistency. And you can't make your spouse be on the same page as you. There are some times when you may have to compromise somewhat, but for the most part, that is the most important thing in marriage as well as in parenting is being on the same page and really thinking.
Tune in next week for the podcast on communication. But that is very true. You definitely need to communicate with your spouse on what the rules are going to be. And we've actually spent time and written down what our rules are. So the kids know what they are. So Haley and I know what they are, so that we can be on the same page. And we are on the same page with the punishment for, certain things. Not that it always works out exactly the same every time. But if there's been times that I've been too harsh with my kids, and I know that, especially in the moment. Sometimes, just being real, sometimes when you get going, punishment, you get upset. And for the record, you should never punish your kids out of anger. You should always punish them to disciple them.
Well, you're not punishing them, you're correcting them.
Right. So thank you for correcting that.
You're welcome.
But there are times that we get upset and angry as we're punishing or correcting our children, and sometimes things go too far, and you got to be really, really careful about that. But my point to this is, there's been times that's happened with me with some of my children, and it never went so far that I hurt the children. But Haley, she could have very well stepped in and said, "Hey, that's enough," but she didn't, because I didn't take it that far. Now, if there's something going on that is abusive. Then you need to step in. But it wasn't abusive. But anyway, Haley very well it was uncomfortable. So Haley could have stepped in and said, "Hey, that's enough." But she didn't. She allowed it to go on.
Well, I think I gave you a look and said, "Danny."
Yeah. But long story short, she didn't correct me in front of the children. And we talked about it in private afterwards. But that still builds, a united wall.
Right.
And there's been times with Haley, her type of, correction when she's upset, it gets to me a little bit too, and I've given her the look, and I'm like, kind of the look of that's enough.
Right. Neither one of us like each other to yell, and we both tend to, when we get really upset in a situation, raise our voices. And sometimes Danny will say, "Well, you're yelling," and I'm like, "No, I'm not. I'm just getting their attention. I mean, I can yell, but this was not yelling." Yeah. So anyway, but we do need to always, correct each other in private. So one of the things about going back to being on the same page, I wrote down, just jotted down some things about this. One thing you can do is read a book together as a couple about parenting, because it gives you a third party's opinion about discipline and how to disciple a child. And that way you're not saying, "Well, I think," and he's not saying, "Well, I think." Right. And of course, you've got the Bible firsthand, of course, that's number one. But a lot of people have really taken it where, for us people who need a lot more like a step by step, okay, what do I do now? Right. They have some really specific books that are biblically based that help you to be confident in what you're doing and the way that you're disciplining your child and being consistent. And we'll on our blog, we have a blog also with Guthrie Family. I will list out those books so that you can have access to those that have been really helpful for us, so that you can kind of look at them too. So that's one suggestion. The other one is, of course, talk. And then the other thing is to work on your relationship as a couple. Right. So sometimes when you're not on the same page, it's actually pinpointing that there's a problem between you and your husband.
Right. And one of the things that Haley said that's very important is, study through certain books together, read certain books together, and have a conversation about it. Because I think one of the things that we miss out on as far as our relationship sometimes, when life gets busy and people, you go to work, come home. A lot of times, Haley and I see each other in passing. It's very rare that, we get time to sit down together. This is one of those moments, but it's very important to be involved in each other's life. Instead of her just being my spouse and, me expecting her just to be my spouse and help when there can be help. We need to be involved in each other's life. Like, I need to know what's going on with her. She needs to know what's going on with me. We need to be reading the same books on certain things so that we can have conversations and talk and really be involved with each other's life so that we can be on the same page. Because it's really hard if I'm off doing my own thing and she's off doing her own thing, and I'm reading my own books and she's reading her own books.
Which is okay some too.
Yeah, it's okay some, but there's certain things that it's nice to maybe once a year read a book together and just communicate and be involved with each other's life. Because like I said, a lot of times spouses, each one has kind of their own life and they kind of meet in the middle, and there's not a lot of communication, and you really don't know a lot about what's going on in the other person's life. So,
well, it goes back to what we were talking about in a previous podcast about having goals or
Mutual
setting
goals.
goals.
Yeah, mutual goals.
And so this is part of our parenting goals, is being consistent.
Right.
So again, it goes back to writing things down and being consistent with each other. So the other things that can kind of lead to you being inconsistent can be being tired. We deal with that a good bit, and a lot of the times when we do have a lot more conflict within our house is times when not only we are tired, but our kids are tired. Right. And so that's the other thing where routine kind of comes into play. As a parent, it's harder to be patient for me when I'm tired. Tiredness interferes with everything. So again, we're trying to be more consistent about our bedtime routines as well as the kids. And it's easy for us to stay up too late because that's our time together where we just get to spend time with each other.
Kind of veg out a little bit and hang out.
Right. And sometimes we do get too involved in conversation or we start watching something, something like that. But if we are not consistent with each other as far as going to bed and having a consistent bedtime routine, then we will be tired. And then again, it affects our attitude and our actions the next day.
What we found is when your kids are well rested, most of the time it's they don't act out as much. A lot of times when a child's acting out and you just can't grab a control of them, most of the time parents, just because they're tired and they're not getting the sleep that they need.
We've come a long way with Jaden, but he hates to lay down and be still and go to sleep.
Right.
And so one thing I told him, he said, well, it just takes me so long to go to sleep. And I said, well, maybe we need to go to bed earlier so that you can be asleep by your bedtime. I mean, if you can't settle down and stay in your bed, then it may be that we need to push the bedtime up and you go to bed when the little babies do, so that it gives your mind time to quiet down and you're able to be still and go to sleep. And so that seemed to correct the bedtime busyness for him, because he didn't want to have to do that. And if he'll be still, he'll go to sleep. That's just kind of part of it.
And another thing that's really good, as far as when we were talking about routines, that we were talking about Miracle Morning by Hal Elrod, but morning routines are great, but evening routines are wonderful also. Like one of the things that we do a lot, we try to eat supper. We try to start cooking by 5. We try to be eating by 6. After we eat supper, everybody knows it's bath time. We get our baths, everybody gets their pajamas on, and then we sit down for a few minutes for maybe a movie, just to kind of wind down a little bit for a movie.
Well, maybe a show. Yeah, something shorter.
Yeah, a show. That's what I'm saying.
And we do that too because there's, of course, we've got a lot of people that have got to bathe. So it helps balance out there's time when other people could be getting into trouble. So we can kind of wind down by sitting down while you're waiting on other people to complete their baths. Right.
But then also right before they go to bed, we haven't been doing this a lot, but we did start doing it, is we have a 20-minute time of meditation at night with the kids, just to kind of wind their mind down, to calm down, to relax, and then we put them to bed. Now we don't do that every night, but we did start that, and we did start seeing some results from that.
Well, and it was a time of just being quiet and still. I mean, we would talk about something ahead of time, of things that we really wanted them to think about and put into their minds, and then we sat still. And I think I felt like 10 minutes was pretty good. Yeah. You said 20, but I think...
Well, we got up to 20 minutes.
I like the 10 minutes. I think it's, the kids after that, they kind of start getting restless. But it was amazing to see our kids that can't sit still for anything sit and be relatively still for 10 minutes for a while.
Well, we got up to 20 minutes. So we started with 5 minutes, and then we got up to 20 minutes, and
even Danlin, who's like a little Tigger.
yeah. So they when they had something to focus on, we gave them something to focus on, and they were able to sit almost completely still for 20 minutes with their eyes closed.
And the whole principle behind that was we were talking to the pediatrician about bedtimes and it being hard for the kids to go to sleep, and I'm sure y'all find that too. And she said the worst thing you can do is let them watch TV right before they go to bed.
And then throw them right in bed.
She said, any time watching television or on tablets needs to be done well before bedtime, and you need about 30 minutes without having that constant stimulation. And having so many children with ADHD, this was something that, we read in a lot of articles as well. So she's just reiterating what we knew. So we decided to enact that. We have not been as consistent as we should have been with that. Our evening routines depend because I'm here some, but I'm not here every evening because I do work a lot of evenings. And so a lot of it falls on Danny doing everything by himself in the evening time.
Right. I have my bigger girls to help, but yeah, it does kind of get a little bit chaotic if you don't control it, and I've kind of slowed down on that a little bit. So one of the things that we did last year is a book that Haley got off of Amazon.
It's by Ann Voskamp, and it's basically Countdown to Christmas.
Right.
It is a book that is every day you read a story, and it goes through basically the whole Bible, but it pinpoints the history of where everything started and how we came to the point where Jesus was born. It's a really great book. Some of it is a little bit above the kids' head, so I had to kind of modify the story some, but that one was really great. We
and that's a great way to settle down at night, is to get all the kids, have them sit around, cut all the electronics off, go put your phones down. Once again, we're going back to be present when in the moment, be there, cut everything off, and just sit down and read a short story to them. That's a great thing to do, is sit down with your kids and read to them. And it's a great way for them to chill out a little bit in the evening. You get used to that routine.
Well, and that also is when that is how we got more consistent with reading our Bible stories at night, because you had to read to count down to Christmas, and so we started this a couple of years ago, and so then it helped us to be consistent with doing that every night, of reading a Bible story every night instead of just hit or miss, on that.
And consistency. Now, Haley is talking about doing it every night, but consistency could be twice a week. Like on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights, we do this. So it doesn't have to be something that so stressful for parents. We got to do this every single night to be consistent. No, consistency is doing the same thing or a similar thing at the same time. So it could be that y'all sit down and read a book on Tuesdays and Wednesday nights, and maybe Friday night's movie night. But it's just setting that plan out, thinking about it, preparing for it, setting that plan out, and then consistently doing what you said that you were going to do, so the kids know what's coming. They can be excited about Friday night movie nights because they know consistently we do that every week. That's just kind of what we do. So not us, but in general, that can be a thing that you do, and they can be prepared for that, and it makes it a lot easier on them to know what's coming, what's going on. They're secure. You'll have more secure kids when you're doing when you're staying on routine and you're being consistent with, because they understand what's coming.
That is something, and just this is kind of off the subject slightly, but that is something when we got our kids, they were not on any type of routine, and so that is something, and that what they talked about even in the classes for fostering and adoption, how important routine is,
right.
And I remember sitting there thinking that and going, well, okay, we're not the only ones that think that routine's important, but it really was, and we did see huge changes with our children when we put them on a routine of, especially bedtime routines are very important. Getting up routines, that's something we've had to establish, because if we didn't establish when we got up in the morning, we have some children that would get up at 4:30 and 5 o'clock in the morning, wake everyone up, and all come down here, and all of a sudden you've got cereal all over the floor, and it's just
chaos again.
Yes, chaos. And so we've had to establish, you do not get out of bed until I come and get you out of bed in the morning. That way, because everything has to be supervised, at this age. Now, as they get older, that changes, but...
Right. And the ages, like we've talked about the ages, but as we're recording this podcast, it's 3, 4, 6.
No.
Kirsten's 3.
She's 2. So it's 2, 4, 6, and 8. And then, of course, 13 and 15.
Yeah, 13 and 15. So there's a variety of ages, but most of those have to be supervised, especially if our older children are not up already, and they're at the age where they may wake up, but they're not coming out of their room until later in the morning. It's kind of interesting. One of the things, Haley just brought up about having a consistent bedtime and a consistent wake up time. Every time she talks about this, she's probably sick and tired of the story, but I tell this story. My grandmother is passed now, but she was born in 1908, and she lived to be, I think it was 92 or 93. She passed away in 2000. So whatever that works out to be. But, anyway, she used to tell me all the time. I lived with my grandmother from the 6th grade until I graduated, and she used to tell me all the time, you need to go to bed at the same time every night and wake up at the same time every day, 7 days a week. Like, you need to be consistent on doing that, and you'll be healthier. Your mind will be more clear. And she used to tell me that all the time.
She also said that the only sleep that counted was what happened before midnight.
Yes. The sleep that matters is the sleep that you get before midnight. So anyway, so that's a bit of wisdom that's been around for a long time, and it still rings true today.
So the last thing that kind of can get in the way of consistency is busyness. And that's something that we are in control of as parents. And I'm not saying, anything is wrong or right about you have to decide what's right for your family. But for us, we have not chosen to do certain things. We've had to cut certain things out of our lives that has created so much chaos and busyness that it takes away from our children, from our lives. One thing, not that we're against sports, because our kids are going to do some sports, but we do have to limit that in our family, because if we have one child that plays
doing one sport, then we're going 8 different ways.
Right. If each child was doing something. So we've tried to find something that each one of them is interested in. Right now we're in a place where really only a couple of children are old enough to do sports. We have one that's physically unable to play most sports. And then the other one that's really not interested. And then we have one that's really good at pretty much everything he wants to do. That's Jaden.
Yeah.
But he doesn't really want to play sports. And so, anyways, you have to decide what's best for your family, because in the end, the way I look at the whole sports thing is, I think it's great for them. I think it teaches them a lot. I think they learn teamwork and learn how to play well with others and to have a good attitude, win or lose. But also,
you can teach those things at home.
Yes, you can. And there are, it is different in our family, because we do know how to get along well with others, or we have plenty of others to get along with here.
Right.
And so you have to figure out what's a priority for your family, and what is this going to mean in the future. So is this going to make them a better person in the future, a better adult, transition better to adulthood, and is this going to mean anything to their future? And that's something that you have to decide as a parent. We're not here to say yes or no. We don't judge people who do all kinds of sports and are gone all the time, because that's what y'all have chosen, and I think everyone should choose what's right for their family.
Right. With the sports thing, some of our kids want to play sports, and if they want to do that, then that's fine. We don't have a problem with that at all. We'll get them involved, but it's really not something that's necessarily a priority for us, is for them to play sports, because I believe that our kids can learn a lot of the same things that they learn in sports here. And let me say this, like in high school, I grew up playing basketball, and basketball kind of saved me as far as staying out of a lot of trouble, because if I didn't have that, then there's probably a lot more trouble I would have got into. So I'm definitely pro sports. I enjoy sports. I know there's good things to them, but it's different for different people. Like my brother and sister had grown up, they were away from the home, so I was kind of like, it was just me and my grandmother there. So I didn't have a lot of sibling rivalry to deal with,
or interaction. With other people.
So anyway,
but all that
so
to
sports
say,
are good.
Yeah, but all that to say, we're talking about how busyness can interfere with consistency. So in other words, don't be busy just to be busy. Make sure that what you're doing, that our whole point here is to live intentionally.
Right.
To be consistent, to teach your children how to be consistent. And if sports are your consistency, that's fine. If going and doing is your consistency, that's fine.
Just be consistent doing it.
Just be consistent with what you do and with your routine. Don't let busyness interfere with what your priority is as a parent. And we're going to go into this more later on the next episode,
right,
about how this is so important for your children, and that what the whole goal is of parenting.
So we're going to do consistency in 2 parts, because there's a lot of information. Obviously, this is part 1, and then we'll have a part 2 to consistency. We may post those at the same time, but just be looking out for it, and we'll talk to you next time.